good segue though, Brianna, because you're talking a little bit electoralism versus mutual aid efforts, and Zach and I are not afraid at all about jumping into some horse race politics. It's one of our favorite topics to cover. And one thing that I thought was really fascinating that you talked about recently on the Hills Rising, you did a radar about it, was this idea of a potential progressive challenger to Joe Biden in 2024. You made the prediction that he's probably not going to run. You were more confident in that than I am.
Mhm.
So before I get into my real question, do you still feel as confident that the Joe Biden will not be the Democratic nominee in 2024?
Yeah, I was pretty skeptical. Robbie and I talked about this a lot. We were both skeptical that he wouldn't run. It just seems so unprecedented. And I ran through how unprecedented it would be at the beginning of my radar. But when high profile, very establishment Democrats start not just kind of dodging the question, but but leaning toward no. It was Jerry Nadler and Carolyn Maloney, I believe, most recently, who gave some pretty firm, I don't think that's going to happen type statements, on top of other kind of Democratic insider types like the Pod Save guys who kept repeating this line of "We'll talk about it after midterms. We'll talk about it after midterms." I mean, if he's running, there's no "we're talking about it after midterms." You say, of course he will, and that's what they used to say earlier in his administration, right? They say there's no reason to believe that he wouldn't. Why would you even ask that? There's no reason to believe that he wouldn't. And that distinct tonal shift, not from people like Cory Bush, right? Or not from people like progressives who have said some statements like that in the past, but from insiders, Democratic Party establishment figures, leads me to believe that he's not running. And so in that radar, I talked about an op-ed written by Michael Starr Hopkins at The Hill, where he believes that AOC is the likely inheritor of the Democratic Party throne. And he articulated reasons why he thought that she would be a good candidate. And so in my radar, I unpacked why she has been a figure of growing skepticism in some parts of the left, and that's something that she will have to contend with if she wants to be successful, because the mainstream, she cannot rely, I
Right.
would argue, on mainstream Democratic, um, the mainstream Democratic Party. They're going to go for a Pete Buttigieg character, and she's gonna, if that's her aspiration, gonna need to rehabilitate her relationship with the left, assuming she can.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I definitely recommend everyone check out your radar. I thought it was a great breakdown. What I'm even more interested in, though, than AOC 2024 is that not that long ago, maybe a few months ago or so, Bernie Sanders himself was out here hinting that he will run in the event that Joe Biden doesn't. So even before anyone gets excited about AOC 2024, what's your thoughts on that? Because it seemed like he was signaling pretty clearly to reporters and to journalists and stuff that in the event that there's an open primary come 2024, he's prepared to jump in the race. And obviously, you were the man's press secretary. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, what did Bernie say exactly? I don't remember him signaling that he was going to get
Oh
back
yeah,
in.
he said if Joe didn't run, he would.
Okay.
Faz Shakir said that. He said it in a press
Oh,
release.
that op-ed. Yeah. I don't know. I didn't read very much into that particular op-ed. It felt like it was attached to like a book release or something like that. It felt like it was part of a promotional project to me.
It was like in the event that he gets questions from journalists, it was almost to stop those questions. Like, don't even ask about Bernie 2024. Here's what the answer is. If there's an open primary, he's going to run. If not, he won't. So a lot of people took that as saying, oh, Bernie is basically saying he's going to run if Joe Biden doesn't. And obviously, we share a lot of the criticisms that you do, Brianna, of AOC and a lot of the other squad members. I'm just wondering who you think, I guess, in your personal preference, if there's anyone you think could carry on the torch of the Bernie political revolution, including Bernie himself. Would you rather it be someone like AOC? Would you rather it be Bernie himself? Or do you want to just start from scratch? Like, what are you thinking about all that? Because it seems like there's not a clear inheritor.
I don't think about it at all, to be honest. There's nothing. The the movement doesn't exist anymore. There. What if there was even a 0.000 chance in his mind that he ever wanted to run for president again? He should not have, I'm sorry, abandoned the movement the way that so many of us felt like it was abandoned from the beginning. There has been very little engagement with left media. There was the one interview with Crystal Ball that, even Kyle wasn't able to participate in. There has been little to no, I'm going to lean toward no acknowledgement of the frustrations or criticisms that have come out of the left since he dropped out of the race very early and with what seemed to be very little in the way of extracting concessions from Joe Biden. There has been an unwillingness, and I'm not an insider. I don't know what the decision making is, and there might be very good reasons for these things. But as an outsider, there has been no explanation for, and therefore I have a frustration with the failure to be a Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema style senator and use the fact that they needed his vote to extract concessions for the left the way that they've been doing for the right. There has been an unwillingness to continue. Well, I shouldn't say continue, because this is one of the criticisms during the primary, that Bernie Sanders wasn't sharp enough in his criticisms of Joe Biden, his critique of Joe Biden. So that pattern has continued, and even, I would argue, softened outside of the context of a literal primary race, where you don't feel the kind of rhetorical tensions and the kind of political tensions that are required to make your base feel like it's still a cohesive unit. Moreover, I do think the lack of engagement with the press is the left media is a bigger issue than people understand. There have been obvious factions within the left that I don't have to explain to you that exist, I believe, in part because there has not been an authoritative person that holds the mutual respect of all of us weighing in on any aspect of anything. It's almost like the Bernie crew doesn't exist anymore to the man himself. And I'm not saying that obviously Bernie Sanders needs to be like weighing in on Twitter spots and things like that. But can
Stay
you
in your own
imagine
lane, Bernie.
Can you imagine a world where there was the kind of dialogue about ongoing issues that felt reorienting and made us understand and not judge everything in the worst faith possible and engage in kind of sniping and presuming there was, bad faith, personal, bad ethical reasons for every decision that everybody made? Even Ro Khanna, I appreciate his willingness to engage, in part because there is no mystery around the man. We're not sitting here thinking, well, why did Ro Khanna do this? And, what is his position on X, Y, and Z? You might not like his position on X, Y, and Z, but that there's not the kind of ambiguity that I think yields resentment. People can say, I don't like Ro Khanna, and they do. Many people do. But I don't get a sense that many people on the left are like mad at Ro Khanna. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that it comes down to a level of betrayal at some point, right? Like I had a very low, I guess I could gin up some anger for Ro Khanna if I think about the legislation he supported. But I think that it comes back down to the real kind of betrayal that you were articulating that people feel from Bernie Sanders. And that's why people get so upset about it. It's why, you want to pull your hair out and cry a little bit, because we had what felt like such a real movement. You know what I mean? It felt like such a unifying force. And I don't have to tell you that you sweat more than any of us have ever have for the movement. And then it just was gone, right? Like you said, poof, disappeared. And then there was nothing. We were all like on our own archipelagos trying to figure it out. And it was like, yeah, we're in the ocean of leftism over here, but we are not a unity. And yeah, it just, people always talk about it like, oh, was it this commentator not being around anymore, or this commentator's changing that made us all disparate? No, it was Bernie Sanders that left us all hung out to dry. You know what I mean?
I kind of do feel that way. I mean, yeah, I'm just trying to imagine a world. Okay, so Bernie's running again. How do you get on? I'm really trying to understand. You guys tell me. What does it look like to get back on stage and say, I'm running on that same 2020 platform? I'm fighting for Medicare for all. I believe we can have Medicare for all. Do we believe? What do we believe that looks like? For me, what was so dispiriting about the fall of 2020, and yes, force a vote and all of that, was having guests on Bad Faith who were very close to the Bernie campaign, who were, the healthcare advisors to the campaign and things like that, and asking them, okay, I understand we have to reassess our expectations and our timeline as a consequence of Bernie having not won this race. but what does the fight for Medicare for all look like now? And getting the very clear answer, it looks like, well, maybe 20 years from now, Gavin Newsom will be president. And like maybe there's a state by state, California will get Medicare for all and it will trickle down and and maybe 20 years. I remember hearing that 20-year number, and it was like a guileless admission that there was no plan, that the fight was over, it was dead, and that it had been shunted to something else. And that to me felt like a betrayal, because there was a way that we spoke with exigency about those kinds of issues in the context of the campaign that I perhaps naively believed. If we're going to say the environment, global warming is an existential crisis, then you need to be moving with that energy, regardless of whether or not you have electoral opportunities to get there. If you really believe it is unconscionable that 68,000 people die every year from a lack of health insurance, and you truly believe that all of those lives and all of those deaths matter, then you should be moving with an energy that shames the Democratic Party for not giving a damn simply because Joe Biden won, simply because Trump is bad, simply because the alternative is scary. We were in the middle of a global pandemic, and all of that conversation completely went away, and people allowed it to go away, right? As many people pointed out at the time, for whatever reason, and again, the lack of transparency here, I don't think works very well for left electeds. But for whatever reason, they literally stopped even performatively tweeting about things like Medicare for all. It was completely out of the public consciousness. And without a media institution that gives a fig, that is a kind of abandonment that I personally have a hard time coming back from. And so while I dream of this hypothetical world where, the 2016 version of Bernie, the 2019 version of Bernie, and the way he captured all of our attention and our trust reemerged like a phoenix from the ashes, and we could just restart like nothing had happened. I'm concerned that the message won't land in the same way, or that the faith people had in our ability to achieve certain goals has been diminished as a consequence of how the movement was disrespected in the intervening years.
Sure. Yeah, no, I definitely understand that. And trust me, I feel, pretty pessimistic about all this stuff too. Maybe not quite as pessimistic as you, Bree, but just to push back maybe a little bit, or maybe just to give Bernie a little bit more benefit of the doubt. You talk about like, oh, I wish he would go back to 2016 Bernie or 2020 Bernie. He feels less present now. But even when Bernie was in the Senate, previous to ever running for elected office, it's not like he was ever this huge like firebrand, like wrecking ball politician. Like, he was known as the amendment king. He usually voted the right way. He usually advocated for his amendments, but it's not like he was ever like there to burn the place to the ground and, start a revolution necessarily. Obviously he used the term political revolution. So maybe he should have brought more of that energy. Obviously I wish he did. But in his mind, like, or maybe going forward, I mean, what if he never was that in the first place, right? What if we just ascribed that to him because we wanted this unifying leader? And obviously his candidacy was something for us to get behind and feel hopeful about. But again, I don't know if he was ever that guy. And in his mind, I'm sure in his mind, he has been trying his best to work within the system over the last couple of years, with Biden being the Senate budget chairman, trying to get the Build Back Better legislation passed and all that stuff. So, and again, you say, I don't know if the movement would be able to happen again like it did, or, who's to say it's the calls for Medicare for all are going to hit in the same way. Well, there was no movement before 2015, 2016 either. There was no real energy then either. And then it all just kind of came up out of nowhere when this guy started running. So I'm not necessarily as certain as you seem to be that there's no replicating that. I mean, it wasn't that.
Well, my argument isn't that there's no replicating that. It's that I don't know that it's Bernie. So if you're right, and I can agree with you, Bernie was never that guy. He was never that firebrand. That is exactly why I question looking to Bernie to restart a movement. I mean, we've already kind of seen how that goes twice. And I just want to be really clear. I have the utmost respect for Bernie Sanders. And, he is obviously heads above the rest in a really sad field. I have a great deal of admiration for the courage that he's displayed through his entire career. And even last week with his effort to get those amendments back into this inflation bill, I appreciate all of that. And I don't, you know, it's in some ways unfair for him to attract the criticism just because he's heads above the rest, right? He's just like the nail that's sticking up. So, but like he really is heads above the rest. But I am questioning his ability to be the one, given now that we've had these trial balloons, for exactly the reasons that you described, and because of the criticisms that he got toward the end of the primary. You know, there's a world I believe where Bernie could have won in 2020, and it required him taking on a different posture, a different rhetorical posture, a more aggressive adversarial posture to both Joe Biden and the Democratic Party that he is not willing to take on. And that is completely within his right. That's completely fair. But for that reason, I am skeptical of what the chances would be for a future run. And if that energy, I do agree with you that the energy exists and the desire for those, you know, for a movement exists. If it exists, I would want to make sure that it's being shepherded by the right person who's willing to do what needs to be done, as opposed to potentially by, if Bernie Sanders were to take that energy up again, and there is a better candidate, which I don't know that there is, but if there were a better candidate and Bernie Sanders took up that energy, knowing that he was likely going to trip up in the same ways that he's tripped up before because he doesn't have a desire to take on that harsher, more adversarial approach, then I wouldn't want that movement energy to be wasted on that kind of a campaign again.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. We needed Bernie to shoot the hostage. We needed Bernie to go out there and say, no, like we needed a Bernie Sanders that was going to write that Zephyr Teachout op-ed himself in The Guardian and say, of course, this man is corrupt. Let's look at the laundry list that he's done in the Senate since 1970, whatever the fuck, right?
Say it on the debate stage.
Yeah, in front of everybody and not let him get off. Oh, you can Google this, folks. It's on the internet. Like, no, you tell us what's on the internet, Bernie. 100%. I couldn't agree with you more.